I never imagined that the life I had carefully built for myself could unravel in the blink of an eye. If you're reading this, I need you to understand one thing from the very beginning. What you think you know about betrayal is nothing compared to what I endured. It started with a smile, a casual text, a seemingly innocent conversation, but beneath that surface, everything was already set in motion. I could feel it, even then, though I didn't realize it until much later. My name is Alara, and this is my story. The story of how someone I trusted more than anyone else, someone I had shared my laughter, tears, and secrets with, decided to turn their betrayal into art. And I learned that revenge isn't just a choice, it's a necessity. It all began at the company I had worked for tirelessly, the place I thought I had finally carved a safe space for myself. My dedication was always visible, my achievements recognized, and my ambition quietly respected. At least, that's what I thought. Then came Livia, the newest addition to the team. She smiled too easily, laughed too loudly, and seemed to know too much about how to manipulate the small gears of office politics. I watched her at first, curious, maybe a little wary, but dismissive, because in my world, no one could possibly threaten me. Weeks passed, and I started noticing subtle changes. Files went missing, projects were misattributed, ideas I had carefully nurtured were claimed by others. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence, a minor office mishap. But when it started happening with alarming consistency, my instincts screamed that someone was deliberately undermining me. And then I found the message. It was short, almost innocuous, but it pierced my world like a sharpened blade. "I've got your back, or do I?" I stared at the words for a long time, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. I had been too trusting, too open, and now it was my vulnerability that someone wanted to exploit. The betrayal wasn't abstract. It was personal. I remember that evening clearly. I sat in my apartment, the dim light from the street lamp casting long shadows across the walls, thinking about what had happened. Part of me wanted to confront her directly, demand an explanation, reclaim my dignity in a civilized way. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt too deeply, the part that refused to bow to injustice, whispered that there was a more satisfying path. A path where she wouldn't just face consequences, she would feel them. And so, I started to observe. Every movement, every habit, every weakness. Revenge is an art, I realized, and artists need patience. It wasn't about anger, not really. Anger is fleeting. This was about justice, a slow, meticulous, and ultimately devastating justice. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. I maintained my outward composure, smiled when needed, nodded in meetings, all while quietly gathering the pieces of the puzzle. Her routines, the way she flaunted her little victories, the people she leaned on for support, they all became notes in a symphony I intended to conduct. Then came the turning point. A chance encounter after hours in the office parking lot revealed everything I needed to know. She wasn't just taking credit, she was orchestrating a network of lies, carefully designed to isolate me and elevate herself. And just like that, the scale of her betrayal crystallized in my mind. This wasn't a simple office rivalry. It was war. And I had to win. I told myself one thing over and over: I wouldn't let this define me. I wouldn't crumble. I would rise, and when the time came, she would see the full measure of what she had done. But first, patience. Patience was my weapon. Patience and observation. The first seeds of my plan were sown quietly. Small actions, seemingly harmless, tested her reactions. A slight misplacement of a file here, a gentle rumor there. Nothing overt, nothing that could trace back to me. Yet every move I made was deliberate, calculated to expose her arrogance, her overconfidence, her blind trust in the wrong people. And then came the day when I realized she had underestimated me completely. The confidence she wore like armor blinded her to the subtle signs I left in my wake. By the time she noticed them, the trap would already be set. I smiled to myself as I planned the next step, feeling an unfamiliar thrill. Not because I enjoyed hurting anyone, but because I finally felt in control again. Because finally, the scales were balancing. You think revenge is about rage. You think it's about anger or resentment. You're wrong. It's about precision, about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves, about creating a moment so perfectly devastating that it echoes long after it ends. And I was ready. But before the storm could break, I had to make one more observation, one final calculation. One mistake now could unravel everything. And as I watched her that day, laughing with colleagues, blissfully unaware of what was coming, I realized she had sealed her own fate. The question is, would she recognize it before it was too late? The days that followed felt like a slow, deliberate countdown. Every interaction with her was a study in human arrogance, a reminder of how blind people can be when they think they are untouchable. She continued her little games, flaunting her victories, laughing at what she believed were clever maneuvers. And I, the observer, the silent architect of what was to come, watched with calculated patience. I started leaving subtle trails, breadcrumbs she would inevitably follow. An innocent-looking email sent to the wrong person here, a casual comment overheard in the cafeteria there, tiny nudges that would, over time, unravel the tapestry she had so arrogantly woven. I had learned early that revenge is rarely about speed. It is about timing. The right moment magnifies every action, every consequence, until the person you are targeting is trapped in the maze they cannot escape. One evening, as I walked past her office, I noticed the careless way she left her desk unlocked, files scattered in plain sight. It was the kind of opportunity that could make or break the entire plan. I didn't act immediately. Instead, I memorized every detail, where the sensitive reports were kept, which ones she relied on for her self-aggrandizement, which colleagues she leaned on for validation. I cataloged everything in my mind, storing each piece for the perfect moment. Then came the betrayal I hadn't anticipated, a small leak, one of her allies unknowingly complicating my plan by introducing variables I hadn't considered. I paused, realizing that even the best-laid strategies require adaptation. And so I adjusted. I refined the timing, delayed certain actions, added layers of misdirection. Each move had to be invisible, seamless, almost artistic in its execution. During this period, she began to notice small inconsistencies. Papers misplaced, miscommunication that seemed accidental, but I could see her frustration growing. Her confidence began to show cracks. And with every tiny frustration, my satisfaction grew. Not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because finally, she was experiencing a fraction of the chaos she had unleashed on me. I started to engage more actively with the environment she thrived in. I subtly shifted colleagues' perceptions, highlighting my own contributions while allowing hers to seem more fragile, more precarious. It was delicate work, one misstep and suspicion could fall on me. But my understanding of her patterns gave me the advantage. People trust predictability, and predictability was her undoing. One night, as I walked home under the muted glow of the city lights, I reflected on the paradox of revenge. It's not only about correcting a wrong, it's about understanding the mind of the person who wronged you, anticipating every choice they will make, and being ready for their desperation when the consequences finally arrive. I had spent weeks analyzing her reactions, building my plan piece by piece. The foundation was solid, the stage was set. The next morning, the first real move unfolded. I arranged a meeting under the guise of collaboration, inviting the key players she relied on most. Her arrogance led her to accept immediately, convinced she could charm and manipulate her way through yet another scenario. But this time, the situation was designed not for her to win, but for her to unravel. The conversation began casually, but as subtle missteps accumulated, her composure faltered. Misplaced documents, contradictory information, and carefully orchestrated leaks from colleagues she trusted began to surface. Each revelation was tiny, almost dismissible on its own, but collectively, they painted a picture she could not deny. Her carefully crafted persona was crumbling. I observed silently, speaking only when necessary, letting her own actions seal the outcome. I realized that true revenge isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers, it nudges, it manipulates circumstances until the person feels the full weight of their mistakes. And by the time they realize what's happening, it is too late to undo the consequences. Her panic grew as she realized how exposed she was. Emails she had relied on for manipulation were now evidence of her deceit. Colleagues who once admired her subtly withdrew their support, now influenced by small hints I had strategically placed. Her arrogance, her carelessness, all of it worked against her. By the end of the day, the culmination of weeks of planning had begun to manifest. She was isolated, her influence fractured, and the reality of her actions hitting her like a cold storm. I didn't gloat. I watched, silently, understanding that the satisfaction of revenge comes not from cruelty, but from witnessing justice in its most elegant form. And yet, even as the first wave of consequences took hold, I knew the ultimate moment was still ahead. The final act, the moment when every detail converged, was approaching. It would be a revelation, not only for her, but for everyone who had underestimated me, who had ignored the subtle power of patience and strategy. As I left the office that evening, a thought lingered in my mind, a quiet, insistent whisper: the most effective revenge is not only about correction, but about leaving someone questioning everything they thought they knew. And soon, she would wonder if she had ever truly known me at all. The morning sunlight filtered through the office windows, but inside, it felt like a battlefield. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was shadowed by the web I had meticulously woven. Today, she would finally see the consequences of underestimating me. Today, her carefully constructed world would begin to crumble entirely. The first sign of panic appeared almost immediately. As she reached for the files she thought were safe, she realized they were gone, or rather, redirected, altered in subtle ways that made them meaningless for her plans. Colleagues she had trusted implicitly began asking pointed questions, referencing information she had been unaware was shared. Each inquiry, each glance, chipped away at the confidence she had always worn like armor. I observed from across the room, calm, poised, letting the tension build naturally. Revenge, I had learned, is most satisfying when it doesn't arrive as a spectacle but as a quiet, inescapable inevitability. She could see the threads unraveling, but the full pattern remained invisible until the final moment. By mid-afternoon, her composure had completely fractured. Emails, documents, and whispered rumors she had thought contained were now converging into a single, undeniable truth. Her betrayal had been noticed, catalogued, and was about to be exposed in a way she could not counter. She tried to speak, to justify, to charm, but the words faltered. The carefully constructed mask of arrogance fell, replaced by panic and disbelief. Then came the final act. I called a meeting, ostensibly to review a collaborative project, inviting everyone whose support she relied upon. As she entered the room, smiling as if nothing were wrong, I let her glance around at the faces of her allies. There was hesitation, confusion, subtle doubt reflected in their eyes. They had seen the signs, followed the breadcrumbs I had laid, and understood the pattern she had hoped to conceal. One by one, the consequences manifested. Her lies were revealed not with a shout or accusation but with facts she could not deny. Colleagues recounted incidents she had manipulated, files and communications that proved her deception, and patterns of behavior that had left others frustrated and misled. The network of trust she had exploited collapsed quietly, efficiently, and completely. I watched her, heart steady, as the reality hit. The same confidence that had blinded her to my patience now betrayed her, leaving only fear and disbelief in its place. She tried to pivot, to regain control, but it was too late. The web had been carefully woven over weeks, every thread laid with precision, every move anticipated. And now, there was no escape. By the end of the day, she sat alone at her desk, her influence shattered, her manipulations exposed. I did not need to gloat. My revenge was complete, not through cruelty, but through undeniable consequence. The lesson had been delivered, quietly but with full force. Justice, as I had understood it, had been served. As I left the office that evening, I felt a strange sense of calm. The world had been corrected, the scales balanced, and I had emerged not only victorious but stronger, wiser, and unafraid of the treachery that life sometimes delivers. I had learned that patience, strategy, and understanding the mind of your adversary were far more powerful than blind anger or impulsive retaliation. And yet, even as the office lights dimmed behind me, a thought lingered, one I knew would echo in her mind long after this day, the question she would never be able to answer fully, no matter how hard she tried. Did she ever really know me, or was she just another player in the story I wrote for her? Now I want to know, if you were in my shoes, would you have stopped at this, or taken the revenge even further? Comment below, I'm curious what you would do.